next have Blue Buchanan. Blue earned their BA in psychology from the University of Notre Dame, their MA in sociology from the University of California, Davis, and also their PhD in sociology in progress from the University of California, Davis. Just prior to joining us, Blue served as associate instructor at UC Davis. Blue studies how violence creates and maintains categories like whiteness and masculinity within the context of U.S. right-wing social movements. Their teaching is grounded in Black feminist pedagogy and deeply informed by disability justice. They will be speaking today on I Too Am a Man, Property, Stigma, and Conservative Gay Politics.
Okay. Hi, y'all. Thank you, Kai, for the introduction. My name is Blue Buchanan. I am in the Sociology and Anthropology department here and a university fellow. I am currently working on finishing my dissertation, of which this talk is a part. Before we really get into the topic today, I want to start with my title slide. This is an image that is created by an artist, Nash, in the 1870s to depict manifest destiny, and specifically to depict the civilizing of the West. Here on our right-hand side, we've got the civilizing influences of whiteness and the American project, and as you can see to the left, you have indigenous and native peoples sort of being driven ahead of this woman who embodies the United States. Our sort of addition image here is the nice white man with a little bubble that says, "Yes, Queen." And this really speaks to what I'm going to be talking about today, which is white gay men in particular, their participation in right-wing social movements. So my interest is in many ways about how people who are otherwise minoritized or stigmatized can still participate in systems of domination. A little bit about who I am before I jump into this particular topic. My pronouns are they, them. I am a Black trans feminist. I'm a sociologist of violence, social movements, whiteness, and masculinity. I came to this topic through a perhaps circuitous route. Despite my many differences from your average right-wing, say, participant, I grew up homeschooled, 7th grade all the way through high school, a part of a young Republican group and immersed in good old Southern Baptist politics. And I was a part of all of those groups despite the fact that many of those things are not exactly in my best interest, right? So I come to this project with a recognition that I've also been immersed in that world building. And this is important because my particular approach to these questions is one that doesn't treat right-wing folks as if they are silly, crazy, nonsensical, but to ask how is it that these folks construct meaning in such a way that they are actually persuaded to act, right, to join organizations. Before I really sort of talk about the issue at hand, things like property, this obviously is deeply at sort of the heart of conservative politics, or at least I'll argue that, is a land acknowledgement. And this is something I encourage folks to include in their courses, with the recognition that where we make knowledge is critical to the knowledge that we produce, right? From a feminist perspective, we know that knowledge is a product of social relations. And so I want to acknowledge that the work that I do and today's presentation is done on the land that has been stolen from the Native and Indigenous peoples. So, what are we talking about today? Today we're talking about property. We're going to be talking about stigma, and we're going to be talking about conservative gay politics. How do, in particular, white gay men end up in conservative social movements? And my argument today is based on three central things. The first being that Western social and legal traditions, particularly around property, facilitate and naturalize scarcity and social Darwinism. I'm hoping to convince you today that being stigmatized doesn't ensure a group will experience a fundamental shift in its expected social and material status, right? So being stigmatized doesn't suddenly make one more concerned about destigmatizing other marginalized people. And last, but certainly not least, that in a conversation about sexual politics, privacy is not what you might think, and that the choices we make in bed or other places matter to the way we view the world, right? So that we take pleasure seriously as a site of political organizing. So who do I study? I am a historical and field method sociologist. We'll get to that slide in a moment. But the folks that I study in particular for my dissertation are three main groups. You've got your log cabin Republicans. These are your run-of-the-mill, often most visible right-wing Republican gay men. You've got your outright libertarians. This is your libertarian LGBT folks. And the last of my cases is the National Socialist League, which was a neo-Nazi group formed in 1974 in Los Angeles that specifically catered to bringing white gay men into what was termed the white nationalist struggle. So we've got everything from your mainstream sort of right-wing politic to what we would classically consider some of the most extreme examples. Now, in order to assess these different groups, I use two methods in particular. When talking about historical methods, I've gathered newsletters, I've surveyed websites, internal documents, memos, meeting minutes, gone to archives across the United States in order to gather data about these groups. In addition, my hope is, moving forward, to include field methods to build a more narrative sense of how these folks make their meaning. It comes with, obviously, some struggles as a researcher, right? Because if, for example, trying to do interviews with, say, a white gay neo-Nazi, this face isn't always particularly helpful in getting them to open up, right? So field methods is something I am trying to add, but also has its own struggles. Now, from this research, I'm essentially going to lay out three central themes, the first of which is property. One of the key ways that conservative gay men make sense of themselves as political actors is through the lens of property. Particularly, the concern with the focus on sexual behavior as always happening within the privacy of one's home. This consideration of property means that things like sexual behavior is outside of the realm of governmental supervision because it's happening within the sort of private boundaries erected by the U.S. State apparatus, right? Now, here we have an image drawn from my archival work from that gay neo-Nazi newsletter, where essentially in the gay neo-Nazi newsletter, they are trying to recruit people to an island nation in the Pacific that they are going to call the United Kingdom of Arya. And it's interesting across all three of my cases that these neo-colonial sort of aspirations, the dream of getting away and producing a new, better sort of white society is throughout both everything from your log cabin Republicans to your gay neo-Nazis. Interestingly enough, if we look at folks, for example, like the libertarians, libertarian groups have a history of trying to create new libertarian nations. One, for example, was in the Caribbean in the 70s, and one was in the Pacific in the 80s, for example. And so part of what is interesting is that all of these relationships, particularly of exploitation, are sort of rest upon property at their base, and in particular upon a Lockean notion of property, where property is only yours if you use it correctly. Insert deciding what correctly looks like into your particular historical moment. Now, all of this is important because property, from the inception of the United States, has served to define who is and who is not a citizen. The white gay men who participate in these social movements actively have to engage in stigma management, right? They are often depicted as feminized. They are often depicted as sexually or gender excessive. So how do these men respond? Well, one of the first things that they do is they engage with various efforts to recover masculinity. Folks like Jack Donovan, a white supremacist and androphile, he doesn't call himself a gay man, an androphile in Oregon, discusses that gay is a feminized slur, and that we need to recover masculinity for gay men in particular. You can see how much of this recovery might also tie into right-wing gay men's production of transphobia and trans antagonism. Oh yeah. And our image here, again, comes from the NSO. We've got Buff Odin, who is clearly there looking very masculine. And this, again, can serve as a sort of tentative entry into these archival materials and the stigma management that we can find within them. And this, I do want to, actually, before I go into it, I do want to note on the next slide, we have some slurs, particularly some sexual slurs, so be prepared for that. This is tied to the last of the themes that I'll talk about today, and that's of the excessive self. Here we have the founder of the National Socialist League saying freedom for all responsible citizens cannot be achieved without a unity of purpose, self-discipline, and individual dignity, qualities to be realized only in a self-aware white society. And that to attain his share of freedom, the sexual nonconformist, not gay, the sexual nonconformist, must shed the image of freak, firebrand, and street faggot for that of the responsible fellow citizen. And so what we also see across all three of our groups is a concern with an excessive expression, particularly of things like femininity, where one's sexual and gendered self spills out from behind the lines of that private barrier, right, behind the, or over the lines of the white picket fence and out into the street. Now, this is important because that line is the one that allows these men to essentially imagine themselves as folks who have been denied the entitled and expected participation they had within the U.S. nation state. So again, we have this excessive sense or a battle against stigma. We have the stigma coming from the popular tropes of excessive gender and sexual fluidity, particularly in association with femininity. And that in order to recover their sense of masculinity, their arguments, first and foremost, are based on property. That in order to be a good citizen, we deserve the right to own, exploit, and use land and property as we wish. This shapes conservative gay men's arguments writ large, in that much of the political organizing for all three of these groups is aimed at ensuring the property rights of what they may term sexual nonconformists, right? Or your normal gay man. It's important to realize that although so far I've discussed these strategies organizationally, other sociologists have talked about these same forms of anti-femininity, these same forms of sexual politics, when talking about who people are hooking up with on the back of Craigslist, right? Like on those private websites. And part of what I'm trying to do with my work is connect those sexual decisions happening in private with the political stances people are taking out in the everyday world. Now, if we want to unsettle this foundational relationship with property, right? Scholar Cheryl Harris talks about property as whiteness, right? If we want to upset property, we have to first start with recognizing that the way we construct property is ubiquitous in the United States. So I encourage folks, if you are trying to, as Foucault says, see the fascist within, if you are trying to confront your own relationships of property and exploitation, I encourage you to take a look at some of the learning circles. I am a part of the Land Acknowledgement to Action learning circle. I encourage other folks, particularly if you are in STEM, to take up the second learning circle, Incorporating Indigenous Ways of Living. And perhaps most important is that if we ever want to really undermine conservative organizing in the United States, we have to do more than simply recognize that land and property in this country is based off of a settler colonial model, and we have to realize we are doing that exploitation right now. And so I encourage folks to check out the Land Back movement in particular and ask, what would it look like if UNCA gave its land and its institutional resources directly back to the control and sovereignty of the indigenous nations of the Cherokee. And with that, I am done with my presentation. I look forward to your questions.